Ethan Vance, a man who traded love for novelty, escorts his mistress into the city's most exclusive restaurant. He's celebrating a win, a life of consequence-free luxury. But across the velvet-draped room, his pregnant ex-wife, Maya, sits radiant. She's not just surviving, she's thriving, dining with Julian Croft, a CEO whose quiet power could shatter Ethan's entire empire. In that shattering glance, the price of Ethan's betrayal is laid bare, not in dollars, but in the life he destroyed, and the one beginning without him. The night is about to become a reckoning. The restaurant, Aurelia, was less a place to eat and more a declaration of status. It existed on the 60th floor of a glass and steel needle piercing the Chicago sky, a silent testament to the gods of finance and influence. Ethan Vance felt at home here. The hushed reverence, the clinking of Christoffel silverware against Bernardeau porcelain, the panoramic view of the city glittering like a carpet of scattered diamonds. It was the native language of his success. Beside him, Chloe Reed was a perfect accessory. Her crimson dress clung to a figure sculpted by discipline and ambition. Her laughter was a practiced melody, light and effervescent, designed to charm, not challenge. She touched his arm, her nails painted the same shade as her dress. "You seem distracted, darling," she murmured, her voice a low purr. "Did the deal hit a snag?" "The deal," Ethan said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, was a masterpiece. He had just closed the acquisition of a smaller tech firm, a ruthless but brilliant maneuver that would make him millions, and headline the Wall Street Journal. Tonight was meant to be the celebration, the validation. He lifted his glass of Macallan 25. To masterpieces, Chloe met his toast with her champagne flute. And to the artist. As their glasses touched, a soft chime echoing in the opulent room, Ethan's gaze drifted. It was a habit he couldn't break, scanning a room for threats, for opportunities, for her. He never expected to find her. Not here. Not now. But there she was. Dr. Maya Hayes, his ex-wife. She was seated at a corner table, the most coveted in the restaurant, framed by the twinkling constellation of the city below. The soft lighting caught the gentle curve of her cheek, the elegant line of her neck. She was wearing a simple but devastatingly elegant sapphire blue dress that draped beautifully over her form. A form that was, unmistakably, pregnant. The air left Ethan's lungs in a silent, violent rush. Pregnant. The word detonated in his mind, shattering the calm, sterile environment he had so carefully constructed for himself. The whiskey turned to acid in his stomach. He remembered their last conversation, a screaming match in their minimalist Lincoln Park penthouse, where he'd called her dream of a family, a ball and chain, and her work as a pediatrician, a charming but unprofitable hobby. He had thrown away a life with her for this, for Chloe, for the thrill of the new, the uncomplicated, the adoring, and Maya wasn't alone. Across from her sat Julian Croft. If Ethan was a prince of the city's financial scene, Julian was its reigning king. Older, with a quiet intensity that unnerved even the most arrogant traders, Croft ran a private equity firm that could swallow Ethan's entire company without so much as a burp. His reputation was mythical, part Warren Buffett, part ghost. He rarely appeared in public, and when he did, it was with purpose. He was leaning forward, listening to Maya with a look of such profound, gentle focus that it made Ethan's blood run cold. He wasn't looking at her like a business associate. He was looking at her like she was the only person in the universe. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. It was a gesture of simple, unadorned intimacy. A gesture Ethan hadn't deserved, and had therefore lost. "Ethan, are you okay?" Chloe's voice sliced through his paralysis. She followed his gaze. Her perfectly made-up face tightened, the painted smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Oh." The single word was laced with a venomous mix of surprise and satisfaction. This was the ghost she'd always been competing with. And now, here she was. Real, vulnerable, and with another man. Ethan felt a primal surge of possessiveness, so potent and irrational it terrified him. That was his wife. That should have been his child, his legacy. He had told himself he didn't want it, that he was free. But seeing it, seeing her, given to another man, a better man, a more powerful man, felt like a physical blow. Suddenly, Maya looked up, as if she could feel the weight of his stare. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, met his across the room. There was no hatred in them, no anger. There was just a flicker of something that was infinitely worse. Recognition, followed by a quiet, weary dismissal. She held his gaze for a heartbeat, a universe of shared memories passing between them. Late-night talks, lazy Sunday mornings, shared grief over a miscarriage they never spoke of again. And then she turned back to Julian, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips as she resumed her conversation. She had erased him. In that single, graceful turn, she had reduced him and his entire, carefully curated life to a piece of background noise, an unimportant shadow in the periphery of her new, radiant world. "Let's get out of here," Ethan said, his voice a low growl. He threw a few $100 bills on the table, not even looking at the bill. "But we just got here," Chloe protested, her voice taking on a whining edge he was beginning to despise. "I thought we were celebrating. The celebration's over." He stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the polished floor, the sound of violation of the room's sacred hush. He didn't look back at Maya's table. He couldn't. The sight of her quiet happiness was a mirror reflecting his own profound emptiness, and the image was more than he could bear. He had won the world. But in that moment, staring out at the city he'd conquered, Ethan Vance had never felt so bankrupt. Leaving Aurelia felt like fleeing the scene of a crime. The cold night air hit Ethan like a slap, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled perfection of the restaurant. He bypassed the valet, needing the walk, needing the brutalist architecture of downtown Chicago to match the jagged edges of his thoughts. "What was that about?" Chloe demanded, her heels clicking rapidly on the pavement as she struggled to keep up. The practiced charm had vanished, replaced by raw, undisguised frustration. "What do you think it was about?" Ethan shot back, his voice tight. "So you saw your ex?" "Big deal. She's moved on. Isn't that what you wanted?" Chloe's words were meant to be reassuring, but they sounded like an accusation. "You got what you wanted. So why are you acting like this?" Because he hadn't wanted this. He had wanted Maya to be miserable. He had wanted her to be waiting by the phone, pining, regretting her decision to finally draw a line in the sand. He hadn't wanted her to be blooming, pregnant and beautiful on the arm of a man like Julian Croft. He'd wanted to win the breakup, and he had just discovered, in the most public and humiliating way possible, that he had lost. "It's not about her moving on," he lied, shoving his hands in his pockets. "It's Croft, Julian Croft. Dining with him isn't casual, it's a power move." It was a weak deflection, but it was all he had. Chloe seized it. "A power move? Against you? Ethan, don't be paranoid. She's a pediatrician, not a corporate spy." But was she? His mind, trained to see angles and leverage in everything, started churning. Julian Croft wasn't known for sentiment. Every move he made was calculated. What if this wasn't a coincidence? What if Maya, scorned and furious, had sought out the one man in Chicago who could truly hurt him? The idea was both terrifying and, in a twisted way, flattering. It meant he still mattered. He remembered the final months of their marriage. It wasn't just the arguments about a family. It was the silences. It was the way Maya would look at him when he came home late, smelling of expensive perfume and moral compromise. He'd been working on the Wexler deal, a hostile takeover that was legally grey and ethically black. He'd bent rules, exploited loopholes, and ruined a small, family-owned competitor to get it done. He'd told himself it was just business. Maya had seen the paperwork he'd carelessly left on his home office desk. She had a mind as sharp as any lawyer's, and a conscience that was sharper still. "This isn't just business, Ethan," she'd said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disappointment. She held a document outlining the pension fund he planned to dissolve. "These are people's lives, their retirement. You can't just erase it. It's a liability on the balance sheet, Maya. It's what you have to do to make the company viable. You don't understand." He had been dismissive, arrogant. "No," she had whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I understand perfectly. The man I married would never have done this. That was the real beginning of the end. The affair with Chloe had just been the clumsy, brutal final act. He had sought out Chloe because she didn't challenge him. She applauded him. She saw his ruthlessness not as a moral failing, but as a sign of strength. She was attracted to the very thing that repulsed Maya. He had built his new life on that foundation, an architecture of lies he'd told himself, that he was stronger without Maya's moral compass, freer without her expectations. Now, seeing her with Croft, the entire edifice was threatening to collapse. "I'm going to the office," he said abruptly, hailing a cab. "The office? It's almost midnight." Chloe's voice was incredulous. "Ethan, this is our night." He turned to face her, the streetlights casting harsh shadows on his face. "There is no our night, right now. I have work to do." He saw the flash of hurt in her eyes, quickly masked by anger. For a moment, he felt a pang of something. Not guilt, but a weary recognition of the pattern. He was doing it again. Pushing away intimacy for the cold comfort of work and control. He got into the cab without another word, leaving her standing alone on the sidewalk, a beautiful statue of his own bad decisions. As the taxi pulled away, he looked at her shrinking figure in the rearview mirror. He had chosen her for her simplicity, for her lack of judgment. But now, all he could see was the hollowness of it all. She was a reflection of his desires, not a partner in his life. The real partner, the one who saw him, all of him, and had tried to call him to be better, was now carrying another man's child. The cab sped through the canyons of the city, but Ethan felt like he was standing perfectly still, trapped in the echo chamber of his own mistakes. Inside Aurelia, the air settled after the disruption of Ethan's departure. Maya felt it more than she saw it, a subtle release of tension in the room, as if a storm cloud had passed. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her sparkling water, the tiny bubbles of fizzy counterpoint to the quiet calm in her heart. She hadn't let her composure break, but her pulse was still a little too fast. "Are you all right?" Julian's voice was low and steady, a comforting anchor. His hand was still resting gently on hers. She gave him a genuine, if slightly tired, smile. "I'm fine. Just an unwelcome ghost from a past life." "Ethan Vance is not a ghost," Julian said, his gaze sharp and analytical. "He's a lingering debt. And debts, one way or another, always get paid." He withdrew his hand, his point made, giving her space. Maya studied him. When her friend, a board member at the children's hospital where she worked, had first suggested she meet Julian Croft to discuss a major philanthropic project. Maya had been hesitant. His name was synonymous with a kind of corporate power that reminded her too much of Ethan. But Julian was different. Where Ethan was loud, Julian was quiet. Where Ethan craved the spotlight, Julian seemed to actively shun it. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words carried an economy and weight that Ethan's blustering never could. Over the past 3 months, their meetings about fundraising for a new pediatric oncology wing had slowly, unexpectedly, morphed into something personal. He never pushed, never pried into the details of her divorce. He simply created a space where she felt safe, heard, and respected. He treated her as Dr. Maya Hayes, not Ethan Vance's discarded wife. "That sounds ominous," she said lightly, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "It's merely an observation," Julian replied, his expression unreadable. "Men like Vance believe they move through the world without consequence. It's the foundational principle of their success. They see people not as human beings, but as assets or liabilities." He paused, his dark eyes meeting hers. "He saw you as a liability, didn't he? Because you have a conscience." The observation was so accurate it stole her breath. It was the entire story of their marriage's collapse distilled into a single, devastating sentence. She had been a liability to his ambition. Her morals, her desire for a family, her refusal to look away from the human cost of his deals, they were all red ink on his personal ledger. "Yes," she whispered, the admission costing her more than she expected. "I suppose he did. His loss," Julian said simply. He then shifted, his entire demeanor changing, becoming warmer, more personal. "Now, enough about him. Tell me again about the cellular regeneration project. I've been reading the papers you sent over. It's fascinating." And just like that, he brought her back to herself. He engaged her mind, her passion. For the next hour, they talked about her work, about the hospital, about the future. He asked intelligent questions, challenging her assumptions in a way that sparked new ideas. He saw her brilliance, not just her beauty. With Ethan, her work had been a footnote in the story of his success. With Julian, it felt like the main event. As they prepared to leave, Julian helped her with her coat, his hands gentle on her shoulders. The gesture was protective, respectful. As they waited for the elevator, he spoke, his tone serious once more. "Maya, I want to be clear about something. My interest in you is not a business tactic, and my dislike for Ethan Vance's methods is a matter of public record that long predates my meeting you." He seemed to be reading her mind, addressing the very fear that had flickered when she first saw Ethan's paranoid stare. "But I won't pretend the two are entirely disconnected. Seeing a good person like you hurt by a man like that, it solidifies my conviction. But my feelings for you are entirely my own, and they are entirely genuine." The elevator doors opened, and the hushed silence of the ride down felt charged with this new, explicit truth. He was laying his cards on the table, offering her a transparency she had craved for years. When his driver pulled the sleek black sedan to the curb, Julian walked her to the door. "He will likely try to contact you," he said, his hand on the handle. "He's wounded, and his ego won't allow him to believe he was so easily dismissed." "I have nothing to say to him," Maya said, her voice firm. It felt true. The anger that had once consumed her had burned down to embers, and now all that was left was a sad, grey ash. She was tired of the drama, tired of the fight. All she wanted was peace. She wanted to focus on the new life growing inside her, a life she had decided to bring into the world on her own, a choice made long before Julian entered the picture. "I know," Julian said. He smiled, a rare, brilliant thing that lit up his stern features. You have a different kind of strength, Maya. It's the kind he'll never understand. As she settled into the plush leather of the car, she realized Julian was right. Her strength wasn't in fighting Ethan on his own terms. It was in building a life so full and meaningful that he no longer had a place in it. The baby inside her gave a gentle kick, a tiny, secret affirmation. She was building her own world now, and it was one that Ethan Vance could never touch. The Vexler file felt like a relic from another life. Ethan slammed it down on the polished mahogany of his boardroom table. The office, usually his sanctuary, felt like a cage. The panoramic view of the city, once a symbol of his dominion, now seemed to mock him, each light a reminder of a life happening without him. He'd come here to work, to bury himself in the cold, hard logic of numbers and contracts. It was his coping mechanism. But he couldn't focus. The image of Maya's serene face was burned into his mind. And Julian Croft's quiet, possessive gaze. He pulled up every article, every financial statement, every whisper he could find on Croft Enterprises. Julian was a ghost, just as the rumors said. He invested in stable, long-term growth sectors, renewable energy, biotechnology, logistics. His portfolio was the antithesis of Ethan's high-risk, high-reward, slash-and-burn tactics. Croft built things. Ethan smashed them and sold the pieces. There was nothing connecting Croft to Maya, nothing to suggest this was a targeted attack. It only made it worse. It meant their meeting was organic. It meant Julian Croft was interested in Maya for who she was. His phone buzzed. It was Chloe. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. He finally snatched it up. His voice clipped. "What?" "I'm outside your building," she said. Her voice was no longer whining. It was cold, hard steel. "Let me up. We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about." "Don't you dare hang up on me, Ethan," she snapped. "I am not some disposable toy you can just walk away from when you're in a mood. I left my life for you. The least you can do is face me. Or are you going to hide in your tower all night, feeling sorry for yourself?" The accusation hit its mark. He was hiding. With a sigh of resignation, he buzzed her up. When Chloe walked into the boardroom, she looked different. The party girl veneer was gone. She had wiped off the heavy makeup, and her hair was pulled back. She looked tired, but resolute. She wasn't here for an apology. She was here for an accounting. "What do you want, Chloe?" he asked, turning to face the window, unable to look at her. "I want to know what this is," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "What we are. Because tonight, you looked at her, and it was like I wasn't even there. I've spent the better part of a year propping up your ego, telling you that you made the right choice, that I'm more exciting, more ambitious, more whatever it is you needed to hear. And in 1 second, she undoes all of it, just by sitting in a room. "It's complicated," he mumbled. "No, it's not," she retorted, walking closer. "It's simple. You never got over her. You didn't leave her for me. You used me to leave her. There's a difference." The truth of her words was a physical shock. He had never thought of it that way. But she was right. Chloe hadn't been the prize. She had been the weapon. The tool he used to finally sever the cord with Maya, a cord he hadn't been strong enough to cut on his own. "And what's worse," Chloe continued, her voice dropping, "is that I let you. I told myself you'd fall in love with me eventually, that once the dust settled, you'd see what was right in front of you." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "I guess I'm just as big a fool as you are." Ethan finally turned to face her. He saw, for the first time, not the mistress, not the accessory, but a woman who had made a desperate gamble and lost. There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Not just hurt, but a deep, calculating intelligence he had always underestimated. "What about the Wechsler deal?" she asked suddenly, the change in topic jarring him. "What about it?" "You told me it was your masterpiece," she said, her eyes narrowed. "You told me it was all above board. But I've heard things. Rumors on the street. That you buried documents. That you pressured the board. That the only reason it went through was because you hid the long-term pension liabilities from the shareholders." Ethan froze. "Where did you hear that?" "I have my sources," she said vaguely. "Is it true, Ethan?" It was the same accusation Maya had made, only this time it wasn't coming from a place of moral outrage. It was coming from a place of cold, hard leverage. "That's a dangerous rumor," he said, his voice low and threatening. "The truth is more dangerous," Chloe countered. She walked to the boardroom table and picked up the Wechsler file. She held it as if weighing it. "You know, I always wondered what she had that I didn't. Now I know. A conscience. And it turns out. A spine." She looked from the file to him, and a slow, chilling smile spread across her face. "You're worried about Julian Croft? Worried he's going to come after your company? Maybe you should be more worried about the people already inside it." Before he could process the implication, she dropped the file on the table. "I'm done, Ethan. I'm done being your placeholder. I'm done waiting for you to see me. I'm going to go find a life where I'm the main event, not the distraction." She turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous room. The click of the door closing was as final as a gunshot. Ethan stood alone, the silence ringing in his ears. He had walked out on Chloe tonight, and she had just walked out on him for good. But she had left behind a grenade. Maybe you should be more worried about the people already inside it. His blood ran cold. Had Chloe been gathering information? Was her question about the Wechsler deal a threat? He had seen her as simple, as adoration personified. He had been a fool. He had underestimated everyone. Maya, Julian, and now, most dangerously, the woman who had shared his bed for the last year. The facade of his perfect, controlled world was cracking, and he had a terrifying feeling that the entire structure was about to come crashing down. The next morning, Ethan's office felt less like a sanctuary and more like a tomb. He hadn't slept. He'd spent the night oscillating between fury and a gnawing dread. Chloe's parting shot had unnerved him more than the sight of Maya and Julian. It was a threat from within, the kind he couldn't easily defend against. He called his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Ben, and gave him a quiet, terse order. "I want a full background check on Chloe Reed. Everything. Who she talks to, where her money comes from, every digital footprint she has. And be discreet." He then turned his attention back to Julian Croft. If this was a coordinated attack, he needed to find the link. He dug deeper, past the public portfolio, and into the man's history, and that's when he found it. A single, obscure business article from the early 1990s. The article detailed the collapse of a small but innovative logistics company, Croft Logistics. It had been driven into bankruptcy following a ruthless, hostile takeover by Vance Industries, spearheaded by its legendary and fearsome founder, Robert Vance, Ethan's father. The CEO of Croft Logistics had been a young, ambitious man named Daniel Croft. Julian's father. The air in the room grew thin. This wasn't business. This was a blood feud. Robert Vance had been a titan, a man who saw business as warfare and mercy as a fatal flaw. Ethan had spent his entire life trying to live up to his father's impossible standards, adopting his ruthlessness without ever truly possessing his genius. His father's ghost haunted the boardroom, a constant, silent judge of Ethan's every move. The Vexler deal, it was exactly the kind of brutal, efficient play his father would have applauded. Now it seemed the ghosts of his father's wars were coming back to haunt him. Julian Croft wasn't just some rival. He was the son of a man his father had destroyed, and he had just been seen dining with the one person who held the key to Ethan's own ethical compromises, Maya. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. The sequence of events was too perfect. Maya, hurt and angry after their divorce, armed with knowledge of the Vexler deal's irregularities. Julian Croft, nursing a decades-old grudge, looking for a weakness in the Vance empire. Had they found each other by chance, or had Croft sought her out? His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Vance, Dr. Hayes is on line 1 for you." Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He took a shaky breath, trying to compose himself, to project the cool authority he no longer felt. "Put her through, Ethan." Her voice was just as he remembered, calm, clear, and with an undercurrent of strength that had always intimidated him. "Maya," he said, his own voice sounding strained. I was surprised to see you last night." "I'm sure you were," she replied, with no trace of warmth. "I'm not calling to rehash that. I'm calling to tell you to stop." "Stop what?" "Stop digging into Julian's life. Stop having your people call my friends, my colleagues at the hospital. Whatever paranoid fantasy you're spinning in your head, leave me out of it. Leave him out of it." So she knew. Croft had anticipated his every move. "I don't know what you're talking about," he blustered. "Don't you, Ethan?" There was a weary sigh on the other end of the line. "This is why we're not together anymore. You create these elaborate wars, you see enemies everywhere, because it's easier than looking at yourself. Julian is a good man. He is helping me with a pediatric wing for the hospital. He has been a kind and respectful friend at a time when I needed one. That is the beginning and the end of the story." "And his father," Ethan countered, unable to stop himself. "Daniel Croft? Did he mention what my father did to his?" There was a pause. A long, telling silence. When she spoke again, her voice was cold. "His family history is his own. It has nothing to do with me or with you. This vendetta you're imagining is a prison of your own making. I'm building a life, Ethan, a peaceful one, and I will not have you or the ghost of your father tear it down." The ghost of your father. The words hit him like a physical blow. She had always seen it, the long shadow he lived in. "Stay away from me," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but imbued with terrifying finality. "Stay away from my child. If you contact me again, it will be through my lawyer." The line went dead. Ethan slammed the phone down, his hand trembling. She had warned him off. She had drawn her line, and in doing so, she had all but confirmed his deepest fears. She was with him. Whether it was love or a shared enemy, they were allied. He was surrounded. Croft, with a generational grudge, was on one side. Maya, the keeper of his secrets, was on the other. And Chloe, the jilted mistress, was a potential traitor in his own camp. The empire he had built, the one he had inherited from the great Robert Vance, felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in. He had always seen himself as the predator, the shark. For the first time in his life, Ethan Vance felt like prey. The ghost of his father wouldn't be proud, he would be disgusted. The coffee shop was anonymous, a place of transient students and freelancers tucked away in Wicker Park, far from the gleaming towers of the Loop. It was the last place anyone would expect to see two women like them together. Chloe Reed, wrapped in a trench coat, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses, slid into the booth. Across from her, a woman stirred her latte, her expression calm and unreadable. She was older, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a severe haircut. This was Rebecca Finch, a senior investigative journalist for ProPublica, known for her relentless takedowns of corporate corruption. "You were right," Chloe said, her voice low. "He's spiraling." Rebecca took a slow sip of her coffee. "Wounded animals are the most dangerous. Is he suspicious of you?" "He's suspicious of everyone," Chloe replied, a bitter smile touching her lips. "He put his security on me. A full background check. He thinks I'm just a scorned woman looking for revenge." "And aren't you?" Rebecca asked, her gaze piercing. Chloe's facade cracked for a moment. A flash of raw pain crossed her face. "My brother worked for Vexler Systems for 20 years, Ms. Finch. He was head of their logistics department. He had a pension, a 401k, a future. When Vance took over, he dissolved the fund to finance the deal. He called it a liability on a balance sheet. My brother had a massive stroke a month later. He's in a long-term care facility. He can't speak. He can't feed himself. All because Ethan Vance wanted a bigger number on his bottom line." The story tumbled out, raw and unpracticed. This was not a performance. This was the truth she had hidden beneath layers of designer clothes and flirtatious smiles. "I tried to go the legal route," Chloe continued, her voice thick with emotion. "The lawyers said it was airtight. What Vance did was immoral, but it wasn't illegal. So I found another way. I found out what he liked, who he was. I made myself into the kind of woman a man like that would want. Someone who wouldn't challenge him. Someone he could show off." Rebecca Finch listened, her expression unchanging, but a tape recorder was running in her handbag. "And he took the bait. Men like Ethan don't want a partner," Chloe said, the bitterness returning. "They want a mirror. I was the most beautiful, most flattering mirror I could be. And for a year, I've been in his house, in his office, listening. I have copies of documents he thought he shredded, memos, emails to his lawyers. The Vexler deal wasn't just immoral. He committed wire fraud to hide the debt from his own shareholders until the deal was done. That part is very illegal." She slid a slim USB drive across the table. "It's all there. Everything you need." Rebecca picked up the drive, her fingers closing around it. "Why now, Chloe? You could have done this months ago." Chloe looked away, out the window at the grey Chicago sky. "I saw his ex-wife, Maya. She's pregnant, and she's with Julian Croft. And the way Ethan looked at her, I realized I was never going to be enough. I thought I could ruin him and feel good about it. But a part of me, a stupid, pathetic part of me, started to believe the fantasy. That he would change. That he would love me." She shook her head, a tear finally escaping from behind the sunglasses. "Seeing her, I understood. I was just collateral damage in a war he's been fighting with himself his whole life. Well, the damage is done. Now it's his turn to pay." Rebecca Finch slipped the drive into her purse. "He'll know it was you. Let him," Chloe said, a strange sense of peace settling over her. "My name isn't even Chloe Reed. He'll run his background check and find a ghost. By the time your story breaks, I'll be gone. My brother is being moved to a new facility, under a new name, paid for with the severance Ethan gave me. All that's left is to burn his kingdom to the ground." She stood up, pulling the collar of her coat tight. She was no longer just a mistress or an avenger. She was something else, something forged in pain and deception. She had sacrificed a year of her life, her identity, her own sense of self, all for this moment. It wasn't a victory, it was a detonation. And she was walking away from the blast zone. As Chloe left the coffee shop and disappeared into the anonymity of the city, Rebecca Finch sat for a moment longer. She had her story, a story of greed, betrayal, and a spectacular fall from grace. But she also had a new, unexpected thread. Chloe had mentioned Julian Croft. Was it really a coincidence that the son of the man Robert Vance destroyed was now with the ex-wife of the man she was about to ruin? Or was there another, even deeper game being played? The story of Ethan Vance's downfall was about to get a lot more complicated. The world broke on a Tuesday. Ethan was in a meeting, projecting confidence he didn't feel, when his phone began to vibrate violently on the table. It was his PR chief, then his lead counsel, then his board chairman. He excused himself, a cold knot of dread tightening in his gut. He clicked on the link his PR chief had sent. The headline from ProPublica was stark. Vance Industries, inside the Vexler fraud. Whistleblower documents reveal pension theft and shareholder deception. The article was a masterpiece of journalistic destruction. It laid out the entire scheme, complete with scanned memos and email excerpts. It detailed, with cold precision, how he had deliberately misrepresented the Vexler pension liabilities, classifying them as a potential future cost rather than an existing debt, an act of accounting fraud designed to mislead his own board and shareholders. And it featured an anonymous, heartbreaking interview with a former Vexler employee whose family was now destitute. But the kill shot was the source. The article stated that the whistleblower was a close personal confidant of Ethan's, who had grown a conscience after witnessing his callous disregard for human life. Chloe, it had to be Chloe. His security chief, Ben, confirmed it a moment later. The name Chloe Reed is an alias. The social security number is fake. The credit cards are tied to shell corporations. She's a ghost, Ethan. Whoever she is, she played you from the beginning. He stumbled back into his office, the glass walls feeling like they were pressing in on him. He was ruined. The SEC would launch an investigation before lunch. The board would call for his head. Lawsuits would pile up like snowfall in a blizzard. And then he saw the second part of the story. A sidebar Rebecca Finch had clearly added for maximum impact. A tale of two tycoons. As Vance empire crumbles, Croft rises. The piece subtly contrasted his fraudulent, destructive tactics with Julian Croft's ethical, long-term investments. It even mentioned, in passing, the old story of how Vance Industries had destroyed Croft Logistics decades ago. It didn't draw a conclusion. It didn't have to. It painted a picture of dynastic justice, of karma delivered across generations. He slumped into his chair, defeated. He had been played, not just by Chloe, but by all of them. This was a symphony of destruction, and he had been the clueless conductor. His private line rang. The caller ID read, J. Croft. Ethan stared at it for a long moment before answering. He had nothing left to lose. Hello, Julian. Ethan. Croft's voice was cool and calm, without a trace of gloating. I imagine you're having a difficult morning. You did this, Ethan rasped. You and her. You set me up. You set yourself up, Ethan, Julian corrected him gently. Your father built an empire on scorched earth, and you tried to do the same. But the world has changed. Men like you, men like your father, you've become dinosaurs. A new ice age is coming for you. And you're the asteroid, Ethan said bitterly. No, I'm just a man who believes in building things rather than breaking them, Julian said. I'm calling for 2 reasons. First, as a professional courtesy, my firm will be making a tender offer for Vance Industries stock this afternoon. At the fire sale price it will be trading at, I expect we'll have a controlling interest by the end of the week. My first act as chairman will be to reinstate the Vexler Pension Fund in full. The humiliation was absolute. Croft wasn't just taking his company, he was sanctifying it, cleansing it of Ethan's sins. And the second reason? Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Maya, Julian said. and his tone softened almost imperceptibly. She had nothing to do with this. She knew nothing about the article, nothing about the whistleblower. The truth is, I did seek her out initially. Your father took everything from my family. I won't lie and say the thought of revenge wasn't appealing. I thought she might be a weapon I could use against you. He paused. But then I met her, and I realized she wasn't a weapon. She's a brilliant, kind, resilient woman who deserved better than to be a pawn in my game or a casualty in yours. My feelings for her became very real, very quickly. What happened today, was set in motion long before I met her. But I am asking you now, man to man, to leave her out of it. Don't drag her into your mess. Don't contact her. Don't blame her. She has suffered enough because of the Vance name. Let her have her peace. It was the ultimate defeat. His rival hadn't just beaten him in business, he had proven himself to be the better man. He had seen Maya for who she was, while Ethan had only ever seen her as an extension of himself. "She's carrying your child, isn't she?" Ethan asked, the question tasting like ash. There was a long silence on the other end. "No," Julian said finally, his voice quiet. "She is not. The baby is yours, Ethan." From one last, desperate attempt at reconciliation, a few weeks before the divorce was final. She was going to tell you, but then she found out about Chloe for certain. She decided she would rather raise the child alone than with a man she could no longer respect. The world tilted on its axis. The air rushed from Ethan's lungs. His child, not Julian's. His. The legacy he thought he'd lost. The life he had thrown away. It was his all along. "She doesn't want you in her life, Ethan." Julian's voice was firm, but not unkind. "But that child deserves a father. Whether you can become a man worthy of that title, well, that's up to you. Goodbye." The line went dead. Ethan sat in the ringing silence, the city glittering obliviously outside his window. He had lost his company, his reputation, his mistress, and the woman he now realized he'd always loved. But in the smoldering wreckage of his life, a single, terrifying and sacred truth remained. He was going to be a father. His redemption, if it was even possible, would not be found in a boardroom or on a balance sheet. It would be found in the quiet, immense, and terrifying challenge of earning his way back, not into Maya's life, but into the life of the child he had never known he had. The war was over. The surrender had just begun. A week later, the name Vance Industries was history. The sign on the building was already being replaced with the understated, elegant logo of Croft Holdings. The financial news cycle had moved on, leaving Ethan's spectacular flameout as old news, a cautionary tale for a new generation of titans. Ethan was in his penthouse, a place that now felt like a gilded mausoleum. The minimalist furniture, the expensive art, the sprawling views, it all felt hollow, the props from a play whose run had ended. He had been forced to resign as CEO, his severance package gutted by clawback clauses related to the fraud investigation. He was still a wealthy man, but his empire was gone. His name was toxic. He hadn't contacted Maya. Julian's words, and his own shame, had been a powerful deterrent. What could he possibly say? How could he begin to apologize for a betrayal so profound it had reshaped her entire life? Instead, he did the one thing he had never done before. He looked inward. He started seeing a therapist, a stern older woman who didn't buy any of his excuses. He sat in sterile silence, forced to confront the man he had become, a hollow imitation of his ruthless father, a man so terrified of emotional connection that he destroyed any chance of it. He learned about his father's early struggles, the desperation that had forged his cruelty. He learned about his own mother's quiet unhappiness, her retreat into charity work as a way to balance the karmic scales of her husband's life. He began to understand that he wasn't just a bad man. He was a product of a broken system, a gilded cage of expectations and emotional neglect. It wasn't an excuse, his therapist drilled into him, but it was a context. One afternoon, a package arrived. It was a simple manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper and the USB drive Chloe had given to the reporter. The note was brief, typewritten. "Ethan, this is the original drive. The reporter has her copy. I know about the Croft family. I know what your father did. This was never just about my brother. It was about all the people you and your father stepped on. You reaped what you sowed. But I also saw you with your wife. I saw that you weren't pure evil. You were just weak. The drive contains everything, not just about Wexler, but about other, smaller things. Things the reporter didn't use, loose ends. If you're smart, you'll give this to the SEC investigators. Full disclosure. A first step. Maybe one day your child won't have to be ashamed of your name." See, he stared at the note. Chloe, or whoever she was, had given him a choice. Not a reprieve, but a chance to choose the nature of his punishment. He could fight, try to hide things, and be slowly, painfully crushed by the legal system. Or he could surrender completely. He could take control of his own destruction. He called his lawyer. "I want to make a deal. Full cooperation. I'm pleading guilty to all charges." His lawyer was stunned. "Ethan, we can fight this. We can mitigate—" "No," Ethan said, his voice clearer and calmer than it had been in years. "No more fighting. It's time to pay the debt." The legal process was brutal. He was publicly excoriated. He lost friends, allies, and the last vestiges of his social standing. But with each asset he signed over, with each damning admission he made, a strange lightness began to settle in his soul. He was dismantling the prison his father had built for him, brick by painful brick. 3 months later, Ethan sat in a sterile waiting room. It wasn't a law office or a corporate headquarters. It was a neutral ground mediation center, chosen by Maya's lawyer. The walls were a soothing, anonymous beige. The art was bland and inoffensive. It was a room designed for ceasefires and treaties. The door opened, and she walked in. Maya was more pregnant now, her belly a beautiful, proud curve under a simple grey sweater. Her face was devoid of makeup, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked tired, but serene. She was alone. No Julian. No lawyers. She sat in the chair opposite him, the table between them feeling like a vast, empty chasm. "My lawyer advised against this," she said, her voice even. "But I needed to do it. For me. And for this baby." She placed a protective hand on her stomach. "Maya, he started, the 1,000 apologies he had rehearsed dying on his lips. They all sounded pathetic, inadequate. "Before you say anything," she interrupted, holding up a hand, "I'm not here for an apology. I've read about what you've done, cooperating with the SEC, setting up a restitution fund for the Wexler employees out of your own pocket. I'm not saying it absolves you, but it's a start." He just nodded, unable to speak. "I'm here to set terms, Ethan," she said, her voice gaining strength. "This is our child, and I will not keep a child from its father. But your fatherhood will be on my terms. There will be a trust managed by a neutral third party for the child's expenses. You will have no direct financial control. You will have visitation rights, starting small, supervised, and only if you continue your therapy and stay on this new path. You will never speak ill of Julian, who has been a rock for me, and you will never, ever make this child feel like a pawn in some game between us. Your role is simple: to be a father. Nothing more. It was a complete and total surrender, and it was more than he deserved. "Okay," he whispered, the word thick with unshed tears. "Okay, Maya, whatever you say." She seemed surprised by his immediate capitulation. She had clearly come prepared for a fight, for the old Ethan to emerge. Seeing this broken, humbled version of him seemed to disarm her. For the first time, a flicker of something other than anger or pity crossed her face. It was a ghost of the old warmth, a flicker of the woman who had once loved the man he was supposed to have been. "Why, Ethan?" she asked, her voice softening. "Why did you do it all? The lies, the affair, the deals. Why?" He looked at her, and for the first time, he told her the absolute, unvarnished truth. "Because I was a coward," he said, his voice cracking. "I was terrified I couldn't be the man you deserved, the husband, the father. I was terrified I would be like him." He gestured vaguely at the ghost of his own father. "So instead of trying and failing, I ran. I blew it all up on purpose, because burning it down felt more powerful than admitting I was scared. I chose Chloe because she didn't ask me to be better. She just asked me to be rich. It was easier." Tears were now streaming down his face, hot tears of shame and regret. "It was the most cowardly thing I've ever done. And I am so, so sorry, Maya. Not just for hurting you, but for not being brave enough to love you properly." Maya watched him, her own eyes glistening. She didn't reach for him. She didn't offer empty words of comfort. She simply sat there and witnessed his confession, giving him the dignity of her attention. She stood up slowly. "The baby is a girl," she said softly. "I'm due in 6 weeks. My lawyer will be in touch with yours to finalize the paperwork." She turned and walked to the door. Before she left, she paused, her hand on the knob. "Goodbye, Ethan." He watched her go, the word goodbye echoing in the silent room. It wasn't the ending he would have written. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no promise of a second chance. Their love story was over. But as he sat there, stripped of his pride and his empire, he realized this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of a long, difficult road to becoming a man his daughter could one day, perhaps, be proud of. He had lost the world, but he had been given a chance to save a small piece of his own soul. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. And so, Ethan Vance's gilded cage shattered, leaving him in the ruins of a life he thought he wanted. His journey is far from over, a painful, uphill climb toward a redemption that may never be fully his. Can a man truly change, or are we destined to repeat the sins of our fathers? What does it truly mean to pay for one's mistakes? This story is a testament to the fact that our greatest failures can sometimes lead to our most profound beginnings. The road to becoming a worthy father will be long and arduous for Ethan, a quiet battle fought far from the headlines. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If you were moved by the story of betrayal, hidden motives, and the difficult search for redemption, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story with depth and complexity. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next compelling drama.